tried to record this video like a dozen times. Anyway, I wanted to talk very briefly about a mistake that Lego made. And it's actually something I've kind of milked twice at this point, this video and a previous one, because it's one of the first topics I covered in my Hidden Connection series. But there's a reason that I'm talking about it here, and it specifically involves this prototype. You see, this prototype is doing something quite interesting with its weapons, holding them both in one hand. And you'll know that with the final version of Tarix, he does not do this. It is in fact not mentioned in promotional material or in the final set at all. It's not in the instructions or anything like that. So why does the prototype hold them like this, but the final version doesn't? And it's also worth noting too that in that prototype, we see the use of a fairly interesting piece. You see, when I started this video, what I had initially wanted to do was actually talk about these three pieces first, because this one is a little different from the other two. Notably that these two pieces, introduced in 2007 with the Baraki line, both actually see recolors in that very year. Notably this one in silver on a few sets, and this one actually sees quite an interesting recolor, although which set it comes from is kind of hard to say. None are really rarer than the other, but it's worth noting that this one never saw a recolor in 2007, and in fact, never saw a use again in Bionicle at all, which is quite fascinating in my opinion. But as you can see here, at the very least, Lego thought about reusing it because it's used twice on this Tarix character, once in dark blue and once in gold. Now, if you know anything about this part at all, you know that it does in fact come in a recolor, but not from Bionicle. Rather, it came from power miners, which is a really interesting sub-theme in and of itself, but ultimately it comes in Mata Blue in that set. So I went ahead and built up a version of Tarix that ultimately uses that part and kind of rebuilds the torso a little bit to allow for more of the Mata Blue, because I think the most common criticism of this character is not enough blue, not enough Mata Blue specifically. The final version of the character only includes the feet, which are a wonderful recolor of that piece, and of course the fists, brand new to that year in Mata Blue. But outside of pins, nothing else appears in that color, which is quite wild. So using something like this, paring down something in Mata Blue for the torso, I do think does help the color end up having a little bit more presence on the final character, even if ultimately I think I still like the final version better than this. But again, notably, we come right back to these weapons, and there's a specific reason why I have the weapons paired like this, and it's because you can do this too. Maybe. You see, the mistake that Lego made involved this piece specifically because this piece is asymmetric. And I don't mean in the obvious jackass way of saying, oh, well, you know, no, I mean along this plane right here, it's asymmetric, and you can kind of see it. It almost looks like it's warped to one side a little bit, but this is an intentional design, and it's so that you can take two of these pieces and slide them together. The axles will align, but the two pieces will pass by each other so that they don't bend. And this is a really fantastic design, but it's never mentioned in the instructions. It's never mentioned in promotional material. And why is that? Well, it's because, at least from what I can tell, Lego made a mistake with this piece. In order for this to work, you have to design the piece very specifically so that you rotate it around its axis when you are machining its mold, ultimately. But I don't think Lego did that. Instead, what I think they ended up doing by mistake is they essentially took this little side profile here, and essentially they mirrored it rather than rotating it. And the problem with that is pretty obvious. When you try to move these pieces, I don't know why I'm still on this layer in paint, don't worry about it, but they collide with each other, right? They don't move in the way you would expect them to. What they should have done was rotated it 180 degrees around its axis so that the two pieces slid past each other. And this would guarantee that every single version of this piece that was released to the public in the Tarix set was one variant. It always bent to one side. However, at least from what I can tell from the community, because I asked this question a while ago when I did my Hidden Connection video, apparently there are two variants of this piece out there. One that bends off to the left and one that bends off to the right. And if you were unfortunate enough to get both variants in your Tarix set, I know you might think you want both, right? No, you don't. You want them to be identical to each other so they slide past. If you got both variants, they wouldn't slide past, they would hit each other instead, and you'd have to actually bend these pieces in order for them to combine together in the way that the prototype suggests. It seems like Lego intended for there to only be one copy out there, but instead of having rotated the piece when they were designing the mold or machining the mold, whatever the case, I don't know their exact technique for doing this. They didn't rotate it, they mirrored it. And so it created this mistake. They found out about it probably too late to actually fix the problem because molds are quite expensive to make. And it's probably likely that they had already started producing some of these, maybe even had them ready to package, right? So they just, cut it from the instructions. If the instructions were going to show that you could do this at all, give it maybe these staffs. Hell, maybe the staff didn't even come around until later. I really don't know for sure. But ultimately, what we do know is that the final model, like we said, would not use this design at all. Instead, just attaching pieces to the end of a little stick, which I know a lot of people complained about too, because they thought it looked really bizarre in the final set to have the weapons just on these little pseudo staves. But it is likely, I don't know why I flipped those backwards. Anyway, it is likely that that was just a quick solution, at least in part, to this problem that they had introduced for themselves. So ultimately, Tarix is a very weird set with a storied history, more so than you might think. And although you might think that the final version of this character is a bit bland, at the very least, you can appreciate that there was a little bit of thought put into the design of this character that ultimately didn't work out quite the way Lego wanted it to. Had these pieces combined together in one hand, would the set have sold better? Would people have liked it more? Maybe. I don't know. I think that this is a set that you buy for those gold armor pieces, for the blue feet, if that's something that you want, because they go great with the Mazika set from the year before. And of course, for that helmet. That helmet looks absolutely incredible. And it also does something unique amongst helmets in that it has a connection point on the helmet itself, specifically for a tube in this case, but for whatever you want in your own mocks. So that's it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. It helps the channel out tremendously. I'm so happy that this video is 7 minutes and not 14 like every other recording has been so far. And of course, if you enjoy what it is I do here and you want to help support the channel, then you can check out the Patreon linked down in the description below. That is always appreciated, of course. But really, subscriptions are the best because it is the way that the algorithm says, hey, you're doing a thing I like. Let's go ahead and continue pushing your content. Let me know your thoughts about this character specifically, these parts specifically. Do you know which variant of this piece you have, if you own it at all? The piece is prone to some damage in and of itself, but that's for other reasons, maybe to be tackled in a future video. And of course, let me know your thoughts. I specifically want to know which is your favorite of the Glatorian sets, but if you cannot pick a Glatorian, then which is your favorite of the prototype version of these sets? Hell, which prototype would you like me to take a look at in the future on the channel? I'll see you on the next one. Take care.